Well, I will turn this over to E and Frederick to get us started.
Hi.
Hey, how are you? It's nice to meet you.
How are you? Nice to meet you too. Yeah, I'm E. I use they, them pronouns, and I run the Central Texas GSA Coalition.
Amazing. I'm going to edit my name to reflect my pronouns, which are he and they.
Cool.
It's definitely one of my favorite Zoom tricks is that you can edit your name and pronouns.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know me, my name is
also edit mine.
My name is Heather Frederick. I go by Frederick. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Texas GSA Network Coordinator for Out Youth.
Hi, Frederick.
Yeah. So, Grayson, if you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, just kind of who you are, what you do, what identities you claim.
Whoa, yeah, so I am an associate director for LGBTQ Studies at UT Austin. I help run the academic program where people teach about trans and queer histories and ancestry. I claim some identities I claim proudly and some not proudly. Proudly, I claim bisexual and trans. Bisexuality is an identity that has traveled well for me as a trans person. It's one thing I didn't have to change about myself when I was trans. So that feels nice. I am a white Anglophone person. I'm from Canada. Those aren't things I claim as proud that I need to be honest about. And I just turned 40, so I'm identifying as a 40-year-old.
That's awesome. Yay. So I guess my next question is that, for folks who might not be as familiar with the discipline, can you give kind of a basic introduction to what LGBTQ studies are?
Yeah, I love that. I love that you put it in the plural. LGBTQ studies is an area or a way to study cross disciplines. And technically speaking, anybody can major or anybody can minor in LGBTQ studies at UT Austin. We have a lot of social workers. We have people in law, medicine, the hard sciences, a lot of aerospace engineers in LGBTQ studies, which I love. So it's something that you can study across disciplines, but basically we study the epistemologies or like the theories of knowing, and the histories and the arts and the culture of queer people across time. And for our students, it seems to be a way to not only learn something about the world that is real, right, which is that queer people have always existed, but also learn something about themselves. So I think a lot of students take it for the kind of self-knowledge, and others take it because they know it's a smart idea to know about cultures that they maybe don't know a whole about, because of the way we've been raised, sexist and heterosexist models.
Yeah, that's awesome. Such a robust and diverse discipline. Yeah, so given all of that, what got you interested in LGBTQ studies?
Honestly, my life journey has taken me here. So I grew up in Canada, and I went to college because that's what my family had in store for me. I went to college, I studied women's and gender studies. It was called women's studies back then. But I was taught, people didn't see that as practical. There were no women's studies departments. It was just a kind of loose field with no kind of home place on campuses. There were women's centers, but no discipline. So I went into philosophy, and it's from there that I learned feminist theory, queer theory, gender theory. And I got a PhD in philosophy from the New School for Social Research in New York. You know, mostly learning about European philosophies, but also really learning about feminism and critiques of gender. And so I took a job as a philosopher in Kentucky at a university there. And I transitioned in Kentucky, you know, as an adult. Having transitioned, I needed a new start. I needed a fresh start. I needed to be in a place where nobody knew my old name. And I just needed not a redo, because it's all part of my life and I don't regret any of it, but I needed a fresh start. So I quit my job in Kentucky as a professor, moved to Austin, and it was a queer miracle that UT Austin was hiring for a program coordinator in LGBTQ Studies. And I just thought, this is my one shot and I've got to take it. And they hired me. So, you know, I'm coming at it from a very different background. You know, I wasn't, in a way, it was where okay, I'm back.
Yay.
And I'm not sure where we left off. I noticed while I was speaking that everyone got very still, and sure enough, you were gone. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think maybe if you could, you know, start talking again. You got hired as the program coordinator at UT. That's kind of where things stopped.
Okay. Which was something, I got hired as a program coordinator, which was something that I was really was not anticipating. It's not anything I'd planned for. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to kind of pivot and turn my life and my work, my thinking, my writing towards the things that all of a sudden really, really mattered to me. You know, all I was teaching in the philosophy department in Kentucky was queer stuff. You know, I mean, it was called political philosophy, but I was really talking about racial and gender justice. And so coming to UT, although it meant I was no longer a professor, you know, I was kind of underemployed for my training. It meant I could kind of grow into this new life, thinking and writing about stuff that really mattered to me. So yeah, it felt like a privilege, even though it's, you know, it's like many trans people are underemployed, right? And I wouldn't call this underemployment, but it meant shifting away from what I was trained to do and kind of create a new alternative academic job for myself.
How long have you been at UT now?
3 years. So I moved here in 2017. Yeah. I moved here on like a Tuesday, and on Friday I had the interview for the job. It was such a whirlwind. So yeah, I'll be starting my 4th year here in the fall.
It's awesome. That's a really interesting journey. I am a philosophy nerd, so I wanted to go back to the philosophy piece and like indulge that a little bit. Do you have like favorite queer philosophers, you know, feminist philosophers? You know, if you had a top 5, who would you pick? Or you can do fewer than 5. It's up to you. We're free here.
Yeah. Well, I have so much to say about this because I am hosting a trans theory conference this fall, October 22nd to 24th, 2020. It started as a philosophy conference for trans philosophers. And if you look up the Trans Philosophy Project, it'll come up. It's going to be a virtual conference, so everybody's invited. We're accepting proposals in any language as long as it can be translated for us to review, and then we'll just create clusters and panels for the conference. So, okay, that's the Trans Philosophy Conference coming up. Favorite philosophers, to me, I mean, Talia Betcher is really my number one for a number of reasons, personal and professional. I think her work in trans philosophy, to make trans philosophy a discipline, has been so important. She's also just a close friend of mine who's kind of mentored me. So Talia Betcher is definitely one person. There's also a lot of amazing non-trans people. So I mean, I want to dial that back. Gail Solomon is another philosopher who's not trans, but who has really done service to the trans community by publishing The Life and Death of Letitia King. It's a book that came out a year or two ago, and it follows the trial of Letitia King, who was murdered, and the gay panic defense was used at her trial. So just having, you know, allies, like allies of trans people who are philosophers who are willing to go to those court cases and document it so we can learn more about how homophobia and transphobia interact. That's been really important. So Gail Solomon is somebody as well. But then, you know, I really learned a lot about how to be a trans person by studying Black feminism, right? So like community building, I think, is hard for a lot of trans people because some of us can disappear, right? We can transition and we don't have to maintain a political identity if we ever had one. So I think learning about like how the Combahee River Collective talks about using diversity as a strength rather than a weakness. And I don't mean diversity like diversity and inclusion at universities is going to save us, like not that type of stuff, but how our differences that create anger and resentment can actually be used as a strength within feminist movements. You know, so it's what we had, I think, before call out culture. And I mean, call out culture is one way to put it, but I think accountability is another way to say it. You know, keeping us accountable without having to downplay our differences so we can be honest about the ways we're different has been pretty important to me. So I don't know. I hope that kind of answers some questions.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And just some great, you know, reading material to have, great information. I love that. So my next question for you is sort of about, you know, the concerns people have about LGBT studies. We hear it a lot when having conversations about humanities and liberal arts majors that it's not practical or you'll never be able to get a job with that degree. So one, what do you have to say to those people? And then I guess the second part to that question is how could a minor or certificate in LGBT studies really complement, you know, other majors like aerospace engineering, as you said, or
yeah.
yeah.
So one, the question of, well, what can you do with that degree? LGBTQ studies is not a degree. So, and there's a long, complicated reason why, but it is not a degree program. In part because it has been marginalized within the humanities as a kind of boutique or fringe area of study, often much the way women's and gender studies still doesn't have a department at UT Austin, right? So this is a fraught topic, it's a political topic. And also I was somebody who was talked out of getting a graduate degree in women's and gender studies because I was told there would be no home base for me. There would be no departments for me to get hired as a tenure track professor. So I did philosophy instead. And I paid the price. Like I would much rather have been employed by lesbian bosses sooner than I was, you know, like being hired by queer people to do queer work is very satisfying, you know. It offsets the kind of tokenism that can happen to marginalized people in the workplace where they're asked to do work that they're not paid for, right? Like diversify the office. So anyways, LGBTQ studies as a minor or certificate is used to augment anybody's area of study, right? Think about the way that our nursing school or our medical school, right? Del Med has its first class just graduated, right? And we have students who get certification through LGBTQ studies so that they know how to deal with queer people in the medical space. Like what that does for the doctor or nurse, well, I mean, it gives them consciousness raising life experience, but it also gives them specialized experience in the needs of queer and trans people. Now, if they are themselves a queer and trans doctor or nurse practitioner, you know, it's gonna increase their like life happiness to know that they can study themselves and help their communities, right? But I'll say that as a queer trans person, if I don't have a good experience at a doctor's office, I do not go back. And it's not just that I don't go back to that doctor's office, I probably won't go to the doctor for another year, right? Because I will be recuperating from the invasive way they talked about my body, or they undermined my gender, right? So it has real life consequences. So in the medical field, it's just so clear to me how having a grounding in gender theory, understanding that there are not just two genders, despite what the medical model teaches us, right? You can unlearn some of those things and just be a better practitioner. Social work is another way that just knowing more about gender can help you better serve communities. Like me, Out Youth of all places, like knows this so well, right? What we can do for a community when we are paying attention to and loving the identities that we're serving. Aerospace engineer, I don't know. I just have many students who are in aerospace engineering, which is like a very specific type of engineering, but they find us, you know, and part of me thinks it's because they are people who were assigned female at birth, who already feel like outsiders in that field for just basic sexism reasons, right? But we find these non-binary and, you know, queer and just non-conforming people over in aerospace engineering coming over to get their minor, their certificate in LGBTQ studies, and I love it. I mean, engineers already know about systems and they think about a systemic level, right? So for me, as somebody who's looking at systemic oppressions, it's just like they know about load-bearing structures, right? And I'm thinking about how people bear the burden, the weight of systemic oppressions. I don't know, that's totally metaphorical, but to me it just works, right? If people get certification in LGBTQ studies, in feminist issues, in African and African diaspora issues, and Latinx issues, they're just gonna be better suited to be mentors for the next person who shows up feeling like an outsider. So to me, it complements any degree you wanna do.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting and a really great point that you brought up, that in whatever field you go into, it's really important to have a perspective on the world and on the people who you're going to be working with. Because, you know, people are going to work with queer people. It's going to happen. And so you might as well be good at it. And that kind of intersects with my next question, which is, in what ways has the field of LGBTQ studies sort of shifted to embrace intersectionality? Because I think a lot of historical queer studies has been very white, very cis focused, and I know that the discipline has gotten better, but are there changes that you've noticed, or, you know, at UT specifically, in what ways does the LGBTQ studies program work to, you know, engage with the African diaspora studies or anything else?
Ooh, this is a big question. First, I guess I'll just say, like, queer theory has to reckon with its white institutional power, right? Like queer studies, as opposed to queer movements on the ground, right? You know, really has some work to do to unlearn what whiteness has taught it, right? Like whiteness of the academy, you know, nobody is free from that. And within every marginalized discipline, within every marginalized movement, the people with the most power are going to show up as the face of the movement, right? And that's not right. It just seems to be how things happen, right? Power is so seductive, and it is really hard to do that work of unlearning that while you're trying to do good by your community, right? So yeah, I'm a white masculine presenting person who got the job at UT as the program coordinator for LGBTQ studies. You know, I see that. And so we do have a lot of work to do to make good on our intersectional promise. And it is an intersectional promise. It's also, we try to institutionalize the intersectionality, and that's what's important to me, is that we make space to hire intersectionally positioned people within the discipline. Now, LGBTQ studies, because it's a small program, has 2 hired positions, right? The director and me. But our position, our program has a budget, and we can hire grad students, we can hire research assistants, right? And we can also create, what do you call the connections, programming, co-sponsorships. We make connections that way to African and African diaspora studies, to Mexican American and Latinx studies, to NACE, the Native American and Indigenous studies, because those programs and departments, some of them are departmentalized, MALS and ADS, NACE is not yet. Those departments made it so that LGBTQ studies could exist. We made the program out of using the existing kind of proposals that they used to exist. So we exist in the shadow of those programs that existed first. So maybe that's more institutional knowledge than you want to know. But I think it is up to people with institutional power, as soon as they get it, to start spreading it around, right? So I'm working with Dr. Ted Gordon in the provost's office, who is African American, and he and I are just trying to do the work to get departments more aware of the power dynamics that prevent them from successfully hiring and retaining faculty of color, for instance, right? Now, Dr. Gordon and I are both masculine people in the world with masculine presenting energies and power dynamics. So again, even if he's not white, we both have work to do to undercut the way masculinity works, right? To give some people more power than others. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but LGBTQ studies was intersectionally designed, which is that half the faculty or more of the faculty who teach for LGBTQ studies are people of color, and it's 100% queer. So we try to do that at the organizing level. But again, if you look at the department page, it'll be white looking to you because it is white forward facing if you just look at the director and the associate director. So it's a constant battle.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question. And I think that's something that is a consistent theme in higher education of, you know, it's getting better. Now, at least there are professors of color, there are queer professors, there are trans professors, but often when you look at those, you know, the higher up positions, it is still predominantly white, predominantly male, predominantly cis. And so, yeah, I think that's something really interesting and really important to continue considering, not just in LGBTQ studies, but in all other disciplines as well. Yeah. My next question is, how can the queer community support LGBTQ studies programs that exist and advocate for more of them in other institutions? And I think that would also be really interesting to link back to your earlier point that LGBTQ studies isn't a department, it's not a major. And so how can we advocate for that to change? How can people who aren't involved in higher education necessarily be part of this fight?
Oh my gosh. These are such huge questions. And so I'm gonna, I have to decide how to answer them because there's 1,000 different ways to do it. One, like if you are a parent and your kid if you're a parent and your student, well, you can say kid, if your child wants to pursue, you know, a minor in LGBTQ studies, let them. If they want to pursue a major in African and African diaspora studies, let them, right? This is just be open to letting your child decide what they want to do and what they want to think about. The community in Austin already supports LGBTQ studies in a number of different ways. The people who work for LGBTQ studies are embedded in the Austin queer community, right? So they're not necessarily separate. But an example of how the community and LGBTQ studies really works together is the monthly Transgender Feminisms reading group that we host. We used to host it out of Bookwoman bookstore on North Lamar. Now it's done virtually, but every month it's organized by me through LGBTQ Studies, but we've started partnering with a community member, and we meet every month and discuss a text. So this month we're doing 2 videos actually by Sylvia Rivera and the poet Golden. And you know, it's going to be pretty amazing. We're talking about, you know, how women of color, trans women, non-binary people have had to like educate our gay and lesbian and bisexual cis siblings on how to include trans people who've always been part of, you know, the movement, in the movement. So that's one way, is we just show up every month, and this is a mix. It's UT students, faculty, staff, and community members. And we just kind of keep those connections going, because we foster the importance of each group in that way. But, you know, the question of getting LGBTQ studies to become a department, departments have to be signed off by the state, right? Because this is a state university. So collective action does shape what our government looks like and what we feel is important and where funding goes. So Out Youth knows this very well. So I'll just leave that there.
I'm going to chime in with a piece of history, because I think it's important to understand where and how hard this was. When I was a senior at UT studying film, I was part of the group of students, what was then called the Queer Students Alliance, that issued a comprehensive report, what I insisted at the time we did not call demands, but demands. And one of the demands was for an LGBTQ plus studies department. And it's really nice to see that some of that work has been worth it 13 years later. And also knowing that it's still not enough, because we didn't stutter when we said we wanted a department. And I understand that this may be where it needs to start, but I think putting it in the historical context, it's been over a decade since we asked for it. And here it is doing its good and perfect work, but it still needs to be, that dream needs to be fulfilled. So I suppose that's a call to action for everyone listening who goes to UT or has an email account that can do some advocacy that way to make yourselves heard.
And I have read this report. I keep it, it's a big PDF, right? This is a 2006, 2007. Yeah. Oh, it's on my desktop where it shouldn't be, clogging up my computer. But it's so crucial that these students, you know, 13 years ago did all this work to show me, who was to arrive in 2017, like what is the state of things in terms of queer support. It's incredible. Thank you for doing that, Catherine.
So I only have a couple more sort of like wrap up style questions, but I wanted to pause and see if anyone had other things they wanted to ask or discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Grayson if you could link for the viewers what lessons activists who are working on social justice stuff today can take from LGBTQ studies, and yeah, how we can apply the like historical knowledge to what we're doing today and the kinds of work that's still ongoing today, like on the ground.
These are incredible questions. You know, we were talking about how queer theory performs a kind of erasure, like it whitens itself, even though queer history is not white. You know, the world is predominantly not white. Right? We have these canons of knowledge that tell us otherwise and make us forget things that we know are true. And so I think that LGBTQ studies is pretty good at reminding people of our ancestry and our histories. Even if it's just like reminding us that people we never think of as being lesbian actually are lesbian, right? Like there's always these erasures happening where, oh, it's just a really smart academic woman. It's like, well, she's also like a queer woman of color, right? So these kind of reminders um, with these historical, like what Catherine just did, we need historical reminders because the media is always going, I don't mean like the media in some like superstitious way. I just mean like the way we consume news is in a way that always provokes a forgetting, right? Because it has to be new, right? It's like, oh, trans people. It's like, no, 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 no. 2015 was not the tipping point, you know, like the arrival of Laverne Cox, like, you know, yes, Laverne, we love you. And she knows she's not the first. She's been trying to remind us, you know, Christine Jorgensen was not the first trans woman in the US either. She was just, you know, used by the news to tout, you know, like just look this woman up. She's called like the GI bombshell. She was a Second World War, First World War veteran who came to the US. Catherine, you wanna?
Yeah, I cannot remember which of the two world wars, but I use her in my trainings often. And what this piece of forgetting is really key. And I want to make sure we don't forget that piece. The reason why our communities, especially marginalized communities, turn to story is because the human brain has been wired for story. For millennia, that's all we had in order to pass along information. So telling these stories is critical. Making sure that they're true and correct is also important. We don't need to be making up stuff as part of our stories unless we're telling fairy tales. But the piece that really shocked me from my own story was I was presenting to the UTOLLI program or the NOVA program. I'm not sure what the distinction is there, but it's a collective of elders in the community who return to UT for a day full of lectures once a month. So I was brought in twice actually for the last one to talk about just LGBT stuff, essentially a 101. And there I am for the first time in a room full of elders, now predominantly cis white elders. But I asked if they knew who Christine was, because I was like, this is a unique opportunity. I remember how my face lit up. I said, I'm finally in a room with a majority of people who might remember her. Not a single person remembered who she was. And given the timeline and when she returned, the picture I always paint is that Christine didn't transition here. Christine went away. And it was the birth of the modern trans narrative that in order to transition, we were sent away to change. And then we did not return to where we'd left from. Except Christine came back to America, landed on a prop plane, and shiny ass aluminum. I cannot wait for Frederick to have to caption the shiny ass part. Shiny ass aluminum plane with propellers. And the door lowered and she stepped out and it was flashbulbs. The public was captivated that Christine had been able to transverse the gender binary in a way that gave her significant passing privilege. And just as Grayson has said, the newness wore off quickly and it turned into suspicion. And Christine went into hiding and was largely never heard of again. So the erasing and the forgetting is rampant and needs to stop, which is why what Grayson and the LGBTQ Studies program, department, I'm just going to keep calling it a department. And then when people correct and say it's a program, no, I'm pretty sure Catherine said it was a department.
We got to fake it till we
Or
make
just,
it.
it just accidentally work our way into a department.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, so, this problem of forgetting, that we have transcestry that is pre-colonial, this gender binary we inherited from, my ancestors, and from colonial societies that needed to make their capitalist systems work. They needed to know who the workers were and who the people giving birth to children were, and to organize. I mean, it's just such a deep, long history of the way gender binary has been imposed on communities. And so part of doing LGBTQ studies is a project of remembering and learning who your role models are and how deep and long your history is. I grew up in the 90s, and how did I learn about trans life? I watched Boys Don't Cry. Don't watch that movie. That's not about trans people. That is about, like, I would I have come out sooner as trans if I'd never seen that movie? I don't know. I don't answer those questions. But like, that movie told me something about what was going to happen to somebody like me, right? And meanwhile, that movie erased the history of what happened that night, which is that Philip Devine and another woman were murdered too. A Black disabled man was murdered that night that Brandon Tina was murdered. And, the aftermath of Brandon Tina's murder in '93 was just, it's had an impact, and it's one of so many trans murders, And so today that Tony McDade's name is in my head every day, and I get to honor him, and he's not, I mean, he was being misgendered, but he's not now, that we can honor him. Premature death, I mean, murder, right? Like, murder and suicide wrecks our community. And I guess I just want people to remember, like, what gets erased when we try to just use the media as our way to know our transestry. It's not enough. So LGBTQ studies can offer some more nuance and make its own mistakes, but because it's the study of, we can keep correcting and expanding and learning more.
Just going to butt in real quick. Christine Jorgensen was from World War II, just FYI. Google came through on that one. But I have a couple of final questions. And the first is, do you have a favorite lesser known LGBTQ historical figure?
Well, first I gotta give a shout out to C. Riley Snorton, who's a contemporary. They is alive now and writing incredible work. So Riley has written Black on Both Sides, The Racial History of Trans Identity, which is an incredible book, a difficult book, but it talks about a lot of different things, including how modern gynecology was created using enslaved people's bodies, enslaved women and trans men and non-binary peoples, right? Oh, is that the book there? Right. So people assigned female at birth, who were enslaved, were used because white women's bodies could not be used for such things, right? So like, learning the dark history, like, do medical students know that, right? Do they need to know that? I mean, I don't think it's irrelevant to know the violence that makes things become realities for your MDs and your nurses, right? But Riley Snorton is alive today and writing and is doing beautiful work. A little known, I mean, I don't know how little known he is, but Lou Sullivan's diaries just came out and in September last year. And Lou Sullivan is this white trans man who was alive during the AIDS epidemic, born in the 60s, and wrote diaries, was prolific, and folks have published this small enough volume. Susan Stryker did the foreword or something like that. But you know, Lou Sullivan was the first kind of openly known or well-known gay trans man, you know, and that's important, that we know who our bisexual, gay, and lesbian trans elders are, because they are erased all the time because of the way cis sexism and transphobia construes trans people as actually closeted homosexuals, right? So that we transition to live a straight looking life. Like, it's just like, it makes me want to throw up, right? Like, because I have to tell you what that lie is, just to give you some context. It's a gross lie, and it erases gay and lesbian and bisexual trans people, and I will not have it. But Lou Sullivan, oh my God, his diaries are heartbreaking, and he was refused AIDS medication support therapy. He contracted AIDS during the epidemic, and he was refused medication either because he was trans or because he was gay. I can't remember. I think it was because he was trans, and the gay, well, you'll have to read it. You have to read for yourself. But anyways, it's a beautiful, heartbreaking memoir. But Lou, he just pulls at my heartstrings. You know, this soft trans masculine gay guy, just all about it. I just think that that kind of softness is what masculinity needs. Gay, straight, bi, pan masculinities all need some softness. And I think that Lou is, I mean, he's troublesome and sweet and, you know, codependent and so brilliant and steadfast. It's a beautiful book that is now available to us. So I'd say Lou Sullivan.
Speaking of diaries, I was shocked when I learned last year that Anne Frank was bisexual, and that the translation that we have of Anne Frank's diaries completely removes all of the thoughts and feelings she expressed about people of the gender that she identified as. And I was like elated and heartbroken at the same time. Like, it's such a strange feeling of like, oh, it's so nice to know these things, and why the fuck didn't I know this before?
Yeah.
Totally bi.
I love it.
I was
Totally
today
100%.
years old when I learned that.
I was also today years old. Wow.
The
That
bi
is-
erasure is very real.
Yeah. So we kind of touched on this already, but do you have some top book recommendations or resource recommendations for folks who want to get a taste of LGBTQ studies?
Grayson's over there grabbing the course manual. They're just going to send us PDFs of all the syllabi.
This is a good time to plug your book, Catherine. Oh, you're muted, Grayson.
This is the Lou Sullivan diary. Okay, it's called We Both Laughed in Pleasure. And I mean, it's really beautiful. It has explicit stuff about just like gay sex. And it's just like, it just feels important, you know, like, what does gay sex look like between trans and non-trans partners? You know, it's just, I don't know, I learned a lot. Just like, it was world making. I think like the value of LGBTQ plus history is that it makes the world possible, right? It makes things more real because things have happened. There's a precedent for it, right? Tourmaline was just saying this the other day when we're talking about like what the future could look like and what can be abolished. You know, Tourmaline reminded us there's a precedent for the world looking otherwise than what it looks like today, right? Binary gender has not always existed. So there's a precedent. So I just love those reminders. So Tourmaline is also another person I would recommend. I believe they have a book coming out, but they're working constantly. So I would look up their stuff too. Their sibling, Che Gossett, is incredible too. Alok Vaid-Menon, who is a Texan, South Asian American, non-binary femme. And then who did we have?
I just got their book. It's great.
Oh,
Alok
good.
is the move. Yes.
Yes. Travis Alabanza is amazing too, another trans femme. I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from our trans femme siblings of color. So I would recommend all their work. And Catherine's. Did we see yours yet, Catherine? Yeah, there it is.
So my dear friend, Dr. Karen Rain, and I wrote Trans Plus, Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You. It was just awarded the Book of the Year award from the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I do think that this is particularly my favorite part of my book, and I think that it's really interesting that we had the kind of conversation we did today. My favorite chapter to write in the book was chapter 1, where when I was writing it, you'll see this little graphic with a bunch of little words on it. So I wanted to make sure that readers, so the book is for trans and non-binary youth and all the people who love them. We break out by continent all of the different terms that have been used by trans and non-binary people since the dawn of recorded history to describe ourselves. And I put in we wrote it in Google Doc. So there was a little comment off to the side that said, can we have the illustrator do a world map with little pointers to where all of these came from? And the publisher essentially said, no. And then our illustrator saw it and was like, oh, yeah, that's not fair. The publisher said, probably not. But I am very proud of this graphic. And the reminder for me in it, and there's a little author's note in there, that by remembering that we have existed forever, made me feel a little less alone. Looks like Grayson has dropped a Facebook link. Tell us more.
I'm also trying to find the link for the Gender and Sexuality Center at UT Austin is the student services organization that supports our students in a kind of non-academic, more social advocacy way. And they have an amazing link for non-binary pronouns in many, many, many languages. So I'm trying to find that link. The one I just dropped is the Facebook invite to the Transgender Feminisms Reading Group, which is tonight, and it is our Trans Pride edition. We're looking at 2 short video clips, one by the non-binary Black poet Golden, and also Sylvia Rivera's famous Y'all Better Quiet Down video. So we'll be watching those and discussing. So you're welcome to join us tonight for that. And then I also recommend you visiting the resources from the Gender and Sexuality Center. I'm gonna now drop the link for the non-binary pronouns in multiple languages. Okay.
And on the 23rd of this month at noon Central Time, Quinn Huang from the Gender and Sexuality Center, GSC, will be doing a presentation with Queering Education on finding queer-friendly universities and scholarships and alternative programs, and basically like figuring out what to do after high school if you're queer. So we're excited to get to work with them too.
Yeah,
Also,
Gwyn's amazing.
On June 24th at 6 p.m., KB Brookins from the UT Gender and Sexuality Center will be doing a panel with Shane Whaley, Sam Davis, and Quinn about making classrooms queer inclusive. So yes, lots of fun there.
This is amazing. You've done so well in bringing all the queers together. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, so that is all I have. If you have some closing remarks you want to make, we'd love to hear them. But yeah,
I just wanted to express my gratitude for putting this together, and it's a lot of organizing that you've done. So I want to just say thank you for that. And I enjoy this so much, and I can't wait to meet more queer students at UT in the fall, whatever way that looks like, but also out in the community. So please reach out to me. You can find me on the social medias. Grayson Hunt is my name. But yeah, thank you so much.
awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
And that is where we will end things for today, friends. We will be making recordings of all of our sessions available online. We have not talked logistics. I'm thinking we may make them available online immediately. And by immediately, I mean once I download and convert them and clip out that weird middle part where we all froze. And then we will be captioning all of them so that they are as fully accessible to the community as possible. But we will be shouting all of that out on the internets as soon as we figure out the next step. Grayson was our first foray into webinar education,
Cool.
so we're gonna see what happens from here.
Cool.
Thank you for
Thank
joining us,
you all.
Grayson.
This is great.
It's good to see you.
Have a
Nice to
wonderful
see
rest of
you.
your week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.